If you've clicked on this video, it's probably because you've heard of this French micro brand, Baltic. You know that they offer really exceptionally made watches at super affordable pricing. But in saying that, there's also a trade-off. You can't have excellently made watches like this without a compromise somewhere. Something has to give. You can't have your cake and eat it as well. Simple as that. So today I'm going to share all the good stuff that these new watches have to offer, but along with that, a few areas where these watches also fall down. Now Baltic have sent out a couple of these watches for me to have a look at, and they're both in salmon. And looking at their website, they do have 6 new models. Now the first thing that I noticed from these new watches, the Bicompax 3 and the HMS, is that they both come in at 36.5mm. They offer some new colorways, a silver blue, a blue gilt, and these salmon versions. And the prices of these watches, the HMS starts at €360, and in this configuration with a flat link bracelet and the open caseback, it comes in at €445. And the Bicompax starts at €540, and in the configuration I've got it here with the beads of rice bracelet and a closed caseback comes in at €600. And to be honest, I would have preferred this with an open caseback for an extra €25 just to showcase that Seagull ST1901 movement. But moving away from that, the hero of these watches, or all Baltic watches, is their execution. Because the movements, for me, are a little bit of a letdown. And I only say that because the watch's finishing, the detail in those dials, the design layouts, and the overall execution is really punching way above its price point. So when I get a watch that looks this good and feels this good and is finished so nicely, I'm also expecting a more premium movement. And I've got to be honest, maybe that's the watch snob talking in me. I hope it's not. I'm trying to be as sincere as possible because the execution is really nice. And I think sometimes we're a little bit spoiled thinking, oh, it would have been nice to have a different movement. Instead of a Miota or a Chinese Seagull in this, it would have been great to have some Swiss higher end, higher grade movements just to match up with the refinement that I'm seeing on an external standpoint. But that's just me. Because looking closely at both of these watches, the footprints are great at 36.5mm, lug to lug of 45.6. On the wrist, both of the watches are going to wear superbly. In fact, a very interesting observation, depending upon the setup of the watch, whether you've got it on a leather strap or a beads of rice or a flat link, it's going to look different and wear different on the wrist. The beads of rice, for argument's sake, I've played around with both watches and they both seem to wear with more presence on the wrist, more substance. They look more substantial. That's got to do with the fact that there's really not that much taper on the bracelet. So in this configuration, it does wear larger than that 36.5 case diameter would suggest. And on the other hand, I've also placed both the watches on this flat link bracelet. And because of that heavy taper on this particular strap, the watches wear small. I believe drawing their inspiration from 1940s, the watches of that era were smaller and romantic and concentrated on a lot of detail. Now, even though these watches aren't to my personal taste, I can appreciate the execution, the fine attention to detail, and the overall quality finish that these guys are offering. One of the first things that caught my attention when I opened the parcels and had a look at these watches, I placed them in my hands, I handled them. One of the first things that came to mind was that these watches are too cheap to be this good. In other words, they've given me a feeling of quality, superb attention to detail and well thought out design, but there's something that's missing for me. Something that's not ticking the heart. Don't get me wrong, I'm completely satisfied with the look. The finishing, the dimensions, the design, the wearability, it's great. And you're thinking, well, what's left? Well, that's easy. The price. They're just too cheap. And I know it doesn't make sense, but as I mentioned, I feel that a watch that's executed this nicely, it's screaming for a better movement. They're both screaming for a better movement. But that goes against Baltic's policy. From what I've seen from this company since their inception is that they're offering great looking, great finished, beautifully designed watches, but cheaper movements, just to make them affordable. That's all good because it allows a vast variety of people to get into a watch like this without breaking the bank. It would have been great to see a refined, high-grade Swiss movement in these watches just to match up the quality of what I'm seeing on an external point. Now, what are the real heroes of these watches? Well, basically the details. If we have a close look at those dials, looking at the Bicompax, you've got a brushed railway track and sector dial, highly polished applied indices, as well as an applied 12 and 6 in high polish, which break up that dial in perfect symmetry. These elements add some really nice character. And if you look closely, there's also a matte sandblasted finish in the center, as well as 2 subdials with concentric circles. So these different finishes and attention to detail really work well. And honestly, they complement the design as a whole. So who's ever designing these dials, I tell you what, I've got to take my hat off. They're really paying attention to detail, symmetry, proportions, negative space, and making this watch work. And that's one of the reasons maybe why I feel that, gee, it just deserves a better movement. It's such a nice looking piece. So these watches are really good to look at. In fact, they're a delight on the eyes. But they're also very frustrating when it comes to legibility, especially in this configuration. With these Salmon dials and highly polished handset and markers, this is where the watches fall down for me. They look incredible, they look amazing, I love the tonality, I love the texture, detail, the mood that's coming off both of those dials. But sometimes, especially indoors, you might not be able to get a gauge on time. You have to look once or twice. I suppose in a situation and a design like this, the materials chosen, you can't have everything. There's always going to be a trade-off somewhere. And here, it's legibility. However, the fact that Baltic offers different colorways in these watches with more contrast between the handset and dial, that's an option that's going to satisfy any stickler out there. But for the romantic at heart, these Salmon dial layouts, they're probably the choice. Moving away from that, the movement of these watches is where the money is saved. You've got a Seagull ST1901 hand-wound mechanical chronograph in that Bicompax, your standard 42-hour power reserve. Personally, I would have loved to see more power reserve, some around the 50-hour mark, but that's just wishful thinking. The HMS offers a Miyota 8315 automatic, 60 hours of power reserve. On this particular unit, I've got an exhibition case back so you can see that movement. And I suppose one of the other drawbacks that I've found throughout the week of these watches, the Bicompax doesn't hack. That's a standard byproduct of the ST19 movement. And the HMS, that crown, very thin. Would have been lovely to have a little bit more substance on that, just a bit more real estate. But again, here I'm probably picking at straws. Lastly, what I've really enjoyed about these watches, guys, is the minimal text on those dials. And I really like that. You've basically got the brand name Baltic, one of them says HMS, the other one Bicompax, that's it. Clean, minimalistic, beautiful texture on both these watches, and designed in such a way which I think the hero of this watch, which is those dials, they really stand out. Let me know your thoughts, guys. These have been interesting watches to have on the channel for me. As I mentioned, they're not really my style of watch, but I can appreciate the design language, the execution, the finishing. We can all see the direction Baltic is going in. Fantastic looking watches, superb execution and design, and keeping those costs down by not going down the direction of expensive movements, but offering something a little bit more affordable, accessible, but a good workaround and good medium to be able to offer something this nice without having to dig too deep into those wallets. I hope you enjoyed that, guys. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know what you think of this brand or these watches. A couple of my viewers have actually asked me to get the Salmon dials in, so I've got them both here. They've been fantastic, and although they've disappointed in the area of legibility in certain lighting scenarios, the different textures and details and light play has also balanced that out to offer a very unique product with a bit of flair, character, and individuality. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the watch that's currently on your wrist, and we'll see you in the next one.